When we are talking about that kind of policy suggestions, we are forgetting about the majority of people who are part of this caste system, and they are the very oppressed positions where they have no choice. Hello everyone. First of all, I would like to thank all organizers of this program for having me here. I think it's a wonderful opportunity for me, and I'm very happy since the morning seeing like so many people around here and a hall full of people talking about different political, cultural and sociological issues that is affecting Dalits as a community and also our nation. So I'm happy being part of this program. So I have given a topic which is contemporary Indian state and inclusive polity. So I will be talking about this subject in a Dalit feminist perspective. I'm not going to define Dalit feminism or like what are the Dalit feminist initiatives, or like I'm not going to give a historical outline about the feminist movement or debates in India. Instead, I would talk about this, how we could approach the idea of inclusive polity in a Dalit feminist perspective. I would read some part of my presentation, and I will talk something, some examples or something like that. For the time purpose, I won't be taking much time. The promise of an inclusive polity lies at the core of Indian constitutional vision. Thank you, Leshman, for giving the outset and the background of how Indian constitution look at democracy, equality, and especially the social equality. So equality before law, social justice, and dignity for all citizens are enshrined as a foundational principles of Indian constitution. Yet more than 7 decades after independence, the lived realities of marginalized community, particularly Dalit women, reveals persistent and deepening exclusions. A Dalit feminist perspective provides a critical lens through which to examine the contemporary Indian state by foregrounding caste, gender, and power as interlocking structures rather than discrete categories. This approach challenges the universalist notions of citizenship and inclusion, asking instead whose lives and whose labor and whose bodies the state truly recognize and protest. So this is the one question I would want to pose here. So which community or which bodies has the full right to be a citizen? We know that or not all bodies are treating equally by the state. You know how the FEMA case is going on. We know how the anti-CA protests are happening. And we know how the rape or caste-based sexual violence faced by Dalit women are treating differently by the state and state mechanism. The Indian state is often characterized as democratic and welfare-oriented, but such characterizations obscure the ways in which caste and patriarchy are embedded within these institutions, policies, and everyday practices. While legal frameworks formally guarantee equality, social hierarchies continue to mediate access to right, resources, and justice. As Dr. B.R. Ambedkar warned in his final address to the Constitutional Assembly, political democracy in India cannot survive without social and economic democracy. The state thus operates through contradictions. It promises inclusion while simultaneously reproducing exclusion through selective welfare provisioning, weak implementation of protective legislation, and forms of disciplinary governance that regulate marginalized lives. From a Dalit feminist standpoint, the state is not a neutral arbiter, but a contested terrain shaped by historical inequalities and contemporary power relations. In this context, we could also think about how Indian jails are filled with all these Dalits, Adivasis and Muslim people. Rather than, we cannot see that so-called upper caste people are in the jails. That doesn't mean that they are not doing crimes. So whose bodies are regulated by state is also an important question, I think. In policy and political, so I work in development sector. So last week I had attended a conference on aging. So where people were talking about the old age people has a right to work. So there should be policies for ensuring the right of all citizens to work. So I was wondering, what about a person, an old age person, it can be neither gender, who continues to work even in his 70s or 80s as a manual scavenger or somebody who is doing that kind of menial job. That's not a choice, of course. It's like it is happening because of the helplessness. So we cannot have a policies that says about right to work. When we are talking about that kind of policy suggestions, we are forgetting about the majority of people who are part of this caste system, and they are the very oppressed positions where they have no choice not to work. So no choice for leisure, no choice for having a decent and dignified old age life. So Dalit feminist thought in India emerges at the intersection of anti-caste movement and feminist struggles, offering powerful critique of both upper caste-centric feminism and caste-blind Marxist analysis. Scholars such as Rangayana argue that dominant feminist frameworks often universalize women's experiences while marginalizing Dalit women's specific location within caste hierarchies. Similarly, Gopal Guru's critique of theoretical Brahmanism exposes how knowledge production itself is shaped by caste privilege. Dalit feminist interventions center labor, violence, sexuality, dignity, insisting that lived experience is not merely anecdotal but a critical source of theory and political insight. Gender-based violence against Dalit women starkly exposes the limits of Indian state's commitment to justice and dignity. Sexual violence, public humiliation, and everyday form of control function as a mechanisms of caste domination, particularly when Dalit women transgress prescribed social boundaries. Although legal protections such as Scheduled Caste and Scheduled Tribe Prevention of Atrocities Act exist, their implementation remains uneven and fraught within institutional bias. Policing and judicial process often reproduce caste hierarchies, leading to delayed investigations, low conviction rates, and re-traumatization of survivors. High-profile cases such as Hathras reveals how state institutions may actively collude the silencing Dalit women's claims. Dalit feminist analysis underscores that such violence is not episodic or exceptional, but structural, sustained by social impunity and institutional neglect. So when you go through the recent cases, sexual violence cases, about on Dalit women or even general women, the thing is the basic assumption is women are liars. So I'm coming from Kerala. You might heard about that infamous case of that female actor is attacked after when she was going from work. So the basic assumption of the court or basic assumption of the public space is that women are liars. So the women, every time when a survivor, her major energy goes to say that I am not lying. Whatever I am saying is a truth. So this basic assumption that women are lying is also shows how misogynist or sexist our society is, how we are normalized the sexual violence. So labor, the other thing is labor and livelihood constitute another critical site where the contradiction of inclusive polity became evident. Dalit women are disproportionately concentrated in informal, hazardous and undervalued forms of work, including sanitation, care work, agriculture, home-based production and even sex work. Including sanitation, caste continues to assign labor while gender intensify exploitation. State policies are emphasize skilling, entrepreneurship, self-reliance, often ignore caste-based occupational segregation and fail to guarantee labor rights, safety or dignity. For example, while Swachh Bharat Mission declares cleanliness and sanitation, sanitation workers, predominantly Dalit, continue to die while cleaning sewers despite legal prohibition of manual scavenging. Dalit feminism critiques such approaches, framing livelihood as individual failures rather than an outcome of structural injustice and caste gender hierarchies. The expansion of welfare schemes in recent decades further complicates the understanding of the contemporary Indian state. While welfare provisioning is often presented as an evidence of inclusive governance, it increasingly operates alongside surveillance, conditionality and moral regulation, particularly of women's lives. Dalit women are positioned as beneficiaries whose behavior must be monitored rather than as right-bearing citizens entitled to autonomy and dignity. Biometric identification systems, conditional cash transfers, targeted schemes often subject marginalized women to scrutiny while offering limited avenues for grievance and redressal. This dual character of the state as both providers and regulator reveals how inclusion can coexist with control, undermining agency even as material support is extended. Come about political representation, which is frequently cited as a marker of democratic inclusion. The increased presence of Dalit and women in local governance through reservations represents a significant constitutional intervention. However, Dalit feminist scholarship highlights the gap between representation and power. Dalit women elected representatives often face proxy leadership, social boycott, violence and exclusion from the institutional processes. Without adequate institutional support, legal protection and political autonomy, representation risks reinforcing symbolic inclusion while leaving underlying power structures intact. So a Dalit feminist vision of state demands more than an incremental reform or a technocentric solution. It calls for a fundamental restructure of power relations through the recognition of caste as a foundational system of social organization, the valuation of care and social reproduction, and the protection of bodily autonomy and labor rights. Such a vision moves beyond charity-based welfare towards justice-oriented governance that center dignity, redistribution, and accountability. Inclusion from this perspective is not about fitting marginalized community into existing hierarchies, but about dismantling those hierarchies altogether. In conclusion, the contemporary Indian state presents a paradox of constitutional ideals and lived exclusions. Dalit feminist perspectives reveals the limitation of liberal and procedural notions of inclusion and emphasizes the urgent need of structural transformation. An inclusive polity cannot be achieved through representation or welfare alone. It requires a sustained struggle for redistribution, recognition and dignity. Justice, as a Dalit feminist reminds us, lies not in inclusion within inequality, but in the collective effort to transform social, economic and political conditions that produce inequality itself. Thank you.